Governor. Let me start by saying that today is actually my dad's birthday. He would have been 98 years old today. He passed away some years ago, but would have been 98. If you haven't heard me talk about my dad or my upbringing before, I'll just quickly say that Dad was a dairy farmer, a lifelong dairy farmer, had an 8th grade education, was a devoted father, perhaps not the classic parenting tactics that would be acceptable today, but when he thought that I wasn't working hard enough or wasn't keeping up my end of the bargain on the farm, one of his favorite things to say, and I heard it probably 1,000 times if I heard it once, was, "I ought to trade you off for a yeller dog and shoot the yeller dog." He had a couple more salty lines that he would use with me that I won't share with you tonight, but that was Dad. He had his ways of motivating me. But that upbringing made me who I am. That life before I ever came to the University of Wisconsin and first visited Madison is the reason I'm standing here. It's the reason I'm doing this. I have to tell you a little bit about where I'm from. And some of you perhaps have heard me talk of Curtis, or you got a little glimpse of the old farm of ours in that video. But Curtis has the distinction of being the community that gave Scott Walker his biggest percentage margin of victory of any community in the state in the last election. My hometown went 90% for Scott Walker in the last election for governor. And Clark County now votes more heavily Republican than Waukesha County. It is a Republican stronghold like few others in the state. But when I was young, when I was growing up on that farm, Clark County was electing Democrats. Dave Obey represented the area in Congress. Tom Harnish was the local state senator. When I was a very small child, a man named Frank Nicolay was the Assembly Democratic leader and the representative for our area. And just to give you a sense of Frank Nicolay and who he was, Nicolay came out for gay rights in the 1960s. A lawyer from Abbotsford in socially conservative Clark County had a more progressive position on gay rights in the 1960s than Barack Obama did in 2008. And the people of socially conservative Clark County kept right on re-electing Frank to term after term. He was a fiery economic populist. He fought like crazy to make sure that Clark County was not only recognized at the Capitol, but well served. And he earned the people's loyalty back in that district. And so I've watched this transformation. I've watched this evolution in places like where I grew up. Once a Democratic stronghold, now a Republican hotbed. So I know a little bit about the challenges we face and what has to happen if you are going to have a chance to have your values reflected in public policy again. If you are going to be represented by people who actually are in a position to govern and actually act according to your will. Some things have to happen in our state for that to be the case again. And I think part of the riddle can be found in places like Clark County and what's happened there. Another thing I can tell you about my dad here on his birthday is that he was a lifelong Democratic voter. And he was a lifelong Democratic voter for one reason and one reason only: Franklin Delano Roosevelt. In fact, the whole rest of his life, he measured every candidate he ever voted for by the extent to which they reminded him of FDR. Whoever seemed the most like Roosevelt, that's who he voted for. And the reason is pretty simple. Roosevelt was a looming figure. He and his allies did things for people in places like Clark County that they never forgot the rest of their lives. My dad was old enough, born in 1919, he was old enough to remember rural electrification. He remembered when power lines were being strung down back roads to every barn and every farmhouse, all the way down those roads. He remembered, of course, he could drive through any small town and he would point to things. He would say, that was the Works Progress Administration that did that, or that was the Civilian Conservation Corps. Of course, he didn't use the full name, he just said WPA or CCC. And he went off and he fought in World War II, and everybody who came home had the GI Bill waiting there for them. And I often, when I have a chance to talk to liberal or progressive or democratic audiences, or whatever label they happen to choose to put on themselves, I'll often ask, what's today's policy? What program exists today that is the modern day equivalent of rural electrification, or the GI Bill, or the CCC, or the WPA? What is in place today that would have that kind of impact, that would change lives to the extent that those programs did? And usually the answer is crickets. Usually there's no answers that come up. And I said, right there is an important clue about what's happening in places like Clark County. Because for every time I hear somebody in the cities say, what's the matter with those people out in rural areas? Why are they so stupid, and why are they voting against their own interests? Whenever I hear that, I ask people, bite your tongue. Because first of all, they're not stupid, and they are not voting against their own interests. They are voting for their interests as they see their interests. And it's true, you might not see their interests the way they see their interests, but you can't impose your own understanding of their interests on them. You got to listen to where they're coming from and make them a better offer. That's our job, is to make them a better offer. My dad's dead and gone. But the people who are there, like him, just like him today, they don't thank FDR or the Democrats for electricity. They've always had electricity. They take electricity for granted just like we take electricity for granted. But you can go down that gravel road that leads past that farm where I grew up. It's still gravel today. And you will indeed see power lines to every barn and every farmhouse all the way down the road, but you won't be able to get an internet connection and you won't be able to get a mobile phone signal. And people have noticed that. And they're wondering out loud whether the people who currently lord over us at the Capitol even know they're out there, much less have an appreciation of the challenges and concerns that they have. And when I was small, I don't know why I thought this, but I always assumed that road would one day be paved. I guess I just figured that was the normal order of progress. That, that one day that road would be paved, and today it is still gravel. But that's not really what's that disturbing to me. What's more disturbing is the number of town officials, town chairmen, town board members I've run into during this journey. I've only spent weeks traveling the state, running for this office, and I've run into more town officials I can count who are telling me that their towns are digging up pavement and putting down gravel because they can't afford to keep filling the potholes. I ran into a town chairman in Rock County, little rural area not too far from Janesville, and he told me that based on their current funding, what funding they've got for road upkeep, based on that funding level, it would take 200 years to make the necessary repairs to their roads. So yeah, they're planning to dig up pavement and put down gravel because they can't make the repairs. They can't keep filling the potholes. And there are people all over the state who are looking at that kind of reality and saying, we're forgotten out here, we're ignored. Nobody gives a damn about the challenges we face. And so they reached for a Molotov cocktail that they could throw at the political establishment, and Trump happened to be the biggest Molotov cocktail they could find. Now, I don't agree with their choice, but I totally get where they're coming from. There are way too many forgotten people and way too many forgotten places in this state. And I'll tell you, it isn't just out in the country. I've made repeated visits to Milwaukee, and I've made repeated visits to a particular zip code, 53206. You may know, you may not know, that 53206 happens to be the zip code where more people are incarcerated than in any zip code in America. 53206 leads the nation in incarceration rate. And you go to a place like that, and they also feel like there's nobody thinking about what we're struggling with here. And so they're dealing every day with the effects of mass incarceration. And that, by the way, is the reason why I have come out and said that we should fully legalize marijuana. The reason I came to that conclusion has nothing to do with use. Our drug laws have been remarkably ineffective and counterproductive. People who are going to use them clearly will use whether it's legal or illegal. The laws has no effect on that. But those laws are the driving force behind mass incarceration. Those laws are why we have prison cells filled with people who have committed no violent crime, have damaged no property. They are behind bars because of possession or use of marijuana. And that's why we imprison so many more people than Minnesota does, because they have an alternative approach to trying to deal with drug-related offenses. We've reached a point now where in Wisconsin, more of our budget goes to pay for prisons than for our whole university system.
Shame.
We spend more of our state budget locking people up than providing a pathway to success. And we are, because we're investing less and less in success, we pay more and more for failure. That is borderline criminal. And unless we deal with the injustice, the racial injustice of those drug laws, I don't know how we get at the problem of mass incarceration. And if we don't get at the problem of mass incarceration, I don't know how we possibly make the lives better for people living in 53206. And so we've got to have the courage to be willing to say what politicians are afraid to say. I think the people are ready to hear this kind of thing. I think they're ready for people to be honest with them and say, look, if we're going to deal with these problems, we have to have the courage to offer real solutions. And that's why I'm running for governor, is because I saw a vacuum, I saw a void, I saw a lack of that kind of honesty. And so to me, I want to tell you that as I have been able to travel around the state, I've been doing a whole lot of forums with the other candidates who've lined up to run for this office. And I have to tell you, they're all very accomplished people. And it's been a pleasure getting to know them. And it's been a pleasure debating them, if you can even call them debates, because they've been awfully respectful discussions. And they are really accomplished people. But I have to say that there are at least two things that they all seem to have in common that I don't share with them. And it cuts to the core of why I'm doing this. First, they all seem really comfortable, too comfortable, with the political system as it currently functions. They seem at peace with the political culture as it is. And I'm not. The political culture in our state has been poisoned. The political system works incredibly well for a wealthy and well-connected and privileged few, but it is failing most of us. And so I can't, in good conscience, just operate happily within that system and be at peace with that culture. No, that system has to be shaken up and transformed if we are to have a hope of having our values reflected in public policy again in Wisconsin. If we're going to be in a position to actually govern and actually have the will of the people become the law of the land, we got to shake up and transform that system. And there doesn't seem to be that sense of urgency from the others who've lined up to run for this office. All accomplished people they are, but there's something to me that's missing. And the other quality that I've noticed that also makes me feel like, no, there's a vacuum here, is that they all seem to dwell on telling people over and over again what's wrong with Scott Walker. And I'll tell you, there are two ways that Scott Walker will not be defeated. He will not be defeated with money. He will have more than anyone. I guarantee it. He will not be defeated with money. In fact, I was in La Crosse just the other day, and I ran into somebody on a street corner who told me that he had been talking to one of the other candidates who's running as a Democrat for governor. I won't say which one. But he was told by this candidate that it would take $30 million to beat Scott Walker. And my response to him was, well, if that's the deciding factor, if that's really what determines this, why on earth do you think $30 million would do the trick? Because in the last election, Democrats spent $33 million trying to take down Walker. And he got the exact same percentage of the vote as he got in the previous election when $22 million was spent against him. And in that election, he got an almost identical percentage of the vote as he got the first time he was elected, and $12 million was spent trying to defeat him. So why on earth would somebody think that $30 million would do it this time when $33 million didn't do it before? He will not be beaten with money. If he's up against big money, and big money rules this election, some candidate will win, probably Walker, but the people will lose. You will lose. And of that I am certain. What he's never faced has been a truly people-powered and crowd-funded grassroots campaign that is of, by, and for the people, that creates a vivid contrast between the billionaire tycoons that are behind him and a campaign that is truly driven by the people and is there working for the people. He has not faced that, and that's what we have to try to throw at him. He will not be beaten with money, and he will not be beaten by simply reminding people in Wisconsin over and over again what's wrong with him. They've been told many times what's wrong with him. They've been told many times what damage has been done. We have to be for something. We have to be for something inspiring enough to make people hungry to vote. And so for me, I am running for governor not because I am against Scott Walker, although I really want to see a new governor. I'm running for governor because of what I want Wisconsin to become. I want Wisconsin to again become a beacon of clean and open and honest government that is recognized as such from coast to coast. I want Wisconsin to be a place where if you work, you will not be poor. I want Wisconsin to be a place where there's a living wage for every worker. Health insurance for everyone, because I've run into so many people. I was in the North Woods just this last week or two, and I ran into so many people who got insurance, but the deductibles and the co-pays are so high, $5,000, $6,000, $7,000. They pay all of their medical care out of pocket all year long, and they're asking themselves, why do I even have insurance? Why do I pay these monthly premiums? Because I end up paying for all my medical care out of pocket anyway. The only way their insurance will ever kick in is if they get so sick that they land in the hospital for an extended stay. And so it's not enough to say, let's have health insurance for everybody. No, we've got to have health care for all so that everybody can get medical care. This should be a state committed to affordable and debt-free education for everyone. So I also recently had an opportunity to talk to a bunch of college kids. And they just about fainted dead away when I told them that I had been able to work my way through the University of Wisconsin, come out the other end 4 years later with $770 in student debt.
Must be nice.
They looked at me like I was from Mars. And I told them, well, it's because tuition was in the hundreds of dollars when I was a student. Not thousands, not tens of thousands, it was in the hundreds of dollars. And I could work my way through college. I worked the pea harvests in the summer, and then I held down a part-time job during the school year, and I could pay my way and come out with less than $800 in debt. Today, the average is $30,000. I've run into young people with $50,000, $80,000, sometimes in excess of $100,000 in student debt. What does that do to our economy? When will they ever be in a position to make a down payment on a house? When will they be able to buy a car? What does that do to the home builders and the realtors and the automakers and the car dealers? What does that do to our economy? We have to commit ourselves to making education as affordable for our kids and grandkids as it was for their parents and grandparents. That's the Wisconsin I want to live in. High-speed internet everywhere. Half of Americans in rural areas, half of rural Americans don't have access to high-speed internet, and the problem is at least that serious in Wisconsin. We need to make sure that high-speed internet goes to every doorstep, every household, everywhere in our state. That's what Wisconsin has the potential to become. And as I said in the video, it should be our goal as a state to become the first state fully powered by renewable energy. And we are not even making a half-hearted attempt to compete in that race, and we should. That should be our goal. I want this to be a state where nobody anywhere is afraid to turn on a water faucet and drink what comes out. I want to live in a state where no town anywhere digs up pavement and puts down gravel. And we have the resources, we have the means to make the investments to create that state. What is absent is the vision and the political will. And I want to run for governor because I want to do everything in my power to bring about that state, to make Wisconsin that place. And this is not about how Scott Walker has followed up. This is about what we want Wisconsin to be and how we can reach that potential. And so the last thing I want to say before turning this into a two-way conversation or a 100-on-1 conversation is that none of this is possible. None of what I just described is possible unless we do one other thing. And I can sum it up as simply as this. Any one of you here tonight, all of you here tonight, could write out a check for $20,000 and hand it to me as a candidate for governor. You can legally hand me that check and I can legally accept it. But here's the rub. I'm guessing you don't have the habit of writing out $20,000 checks and giving them to candidates for office. But there is a certain group of people who do have that habit. And all of my experience, all those years of trying to expose the influence of big money in politics, all of that work taught me that there are strings attached to those checks. There are expectations that come with those checks. And what I've also learned, what experience has taught me, is that they have a very different agenda than you have. What they want your government to do is really different than what you want our government to do. And they get their way because of those transactions. Now, I can't in good conscience take those $20,000 checks because I do recognize them for what they are, what Kathleen rightly described them as when she was introducing me. That's legal bribery. Those are legal bribes. And as long as we continue to participate freely and happily in that system of transactions, you can't have the kind of representation you deserve. You can't have your values reflected in public policy because the people with the habit of writing those checks don't share your agenda. They don't share your hopes and aspirations for your government. And so that means we have to take a risk. We have to have the courage of conviction to be able to take a stand against those transactions and against that system. And that creates a challenge. It means that we are going to have a campaign with a lot of people writing out small checks and then devoting time and energy to talk to neighbors and friends and coworkers and relatives and other acquaintances. This is going to have to be people-powered and crowd-funded. It's the only way that we can make this happen. And that is worth the risk, in my view, because there is a far greater risk if we don't take this stand. If somebody doesn't take the stand, the far greater risk is that we are going to continue to be represented by people who don't actually represent us, but rather who cater to interests with a very different agenda than our agenda. And so I just want to close by sharing with you some words from the greatest president the Democratic Party ever produced. The man who shaped my dad's politics for a lifetime. That president once said, in the depths of the Great Depression, that president said, "The forces of organized money are unanimous in their hatred for me, and I welcome their hatred." And it's that spirit that we have to rekindle in our time. It is that defiance that we have to bring to life in our time if we are going to make Wisconsin what it has the potential to be. We have to recapture what FDR had. That defiance that he had and the stand he took against the forces of that organized money has to be repeated in our day. That's what I will devote every ounce of energy I have and every waking moment I have for the duration of this journey to try to bring that back to Wisconsin and make this place a place that I can be proud of and that you can be proud of. Thanks so much.
Anyone who has a question, I'm happy to run the microphone to you so you can talk directly with Mike. Is there any